Hello, good afternoon. It is time for another teissTalk, Thursday at 4 p.m, our regular slot. We're live every Thursday and Tuesday at 4 p.m. For our teissTalks, getting on all the major security topics of the day, having a chat about the news, catching up, and trying to do what we can to make the world a little bit safer online. Hello, and welcome to all of you. Welcome to our regulars. The chat window is yours to do with as you see fit. Obscenity laws permitting. So do pop your questions and comments in the chat. It's great to see you. Great to see all of our regulars. If you're new to teissTalk, it's your first time, do raise your hand. Put your hand up. We will give away a free Teiss mug if you're a newbie. Otherwise, I should be giving away the mug to whoever has the best comment or quote or joke, in fact, for us in today's session. If you're listening, by the way, to the podcast version of this, do tune in to the video one. You can actually see us on screen and you get the full experience. I'm here every Thursday at 4 p.m. It's Jeff White, investigative journalist and author. And my colleague Jenny Radcliffe is on Tuesdays at 4. Although next Tuesday she's away, so Tom Langford, our august stand-in panelist, host rather, for teissTalk, is going to be standing in next week on Tuesday. Hope everybody's well. Hope everybody's feeling in the Christmas spirit, as we've only got a few more days, 17 more days I make it until Crimbo. Yesterday, I was at DEF CON, the London Excel security conference, and I went to an event in the afternoon. I was delighted to be invited by SecureWorks to their Christmas event, and they gave us a free advent calendar, which is pretty special. And it was only when I got home, having had slightly too many glasses of wine, that I realised on closer inspection, if you look at the calendar, you'll see that all of the numbers, rather than being randomly distributed, which is what they mostly do with advent calendars, make a bit of a hunt as to which day, they put them all in a line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's an incredibly logical calendar and is classic sort of tech security type thing. Let's put all the numbers in order. Let's not do that. Alan, to answer your question, it was Black Hat. Sorry, it was Black Hat Europe. Of course, it wasn't DEF CON. Black Hat Europe was what it was in the Excel Centre. If anyone was there, do say hello. I thought it was an interesting conference. Although, having gone for the first time this year to the Vegas version of Black Hat, it wasn't a patch on the glitz of Vegas, I have to say. But then, what is really? So listen, welcome to all of you. Fantastic to have you with us. Do say hello in the chat there. We've got a great set of panelists to be talking to us today. We're going to be talking about building an effective digital trust framework, and we're going to be looking at that from multiple different angles. So we are open to your guidance as to which bits of digital trust you'd like to hear about. We've got Kevin Fielder, who's Chief Information Security Officer at FNZ Group. Rolf von Rossing, who's partner and CEO at Forfa Consulting AG. Laurie Gibbett, who is Cyber Risk Quantification Manager, KPMG UK South Coast. And Mark Thomas, who's founder and president of Scout Consulting. Founder and president of Scout Consulting at ISACA. So welcome to all of you. Great to have you all with us. Laurie, we're worried about your cat intervening and knocking over your webcam, so we just better front that up to make sure people understand. What's the cat's name so we know who to blame?
Ragnar and Floki, because we're big Vikings fans.
It's called what? Sorry, I missed that. It's
Ragnar and Floki. There's two of them, two boys. So for anyone that watches Vikings, you'll understand.
Fantastic. Viking cat names. I love that. Rolf, how are you and where are you coming to us from?
So, hi everyone. Sorry, switching that video on. I'm joining from Switzerland today. It shows beautiful Lake Lucerne, and in my normal day life, I'm a consultant working with cybersecurity and other things. And with Digital Trust, I have the honor to be with a working group of ISACA that is currently working on an ecosystem and framework for Digital Trust that has been published as an ebook already, but is going to grow as we go along.
Good. Talking of ISACA, Mark will be joining us. He is here. We're just trying to get his webcam sorted out. Kevin, how are you and where are you joining us from?
I'm good, thanks. Just north of London, so not as far away as Rolf.
Good. Yeah, probably a stone's throw from where I am. That's fine as well. And it's freezing here in London now. It's definitely turned a corner towards Crimbo. Alan says, I attended both Black Hat US and DEF CON 11 back in July 2002. No way. But says nothing matches the RSA in San Francisco. Oh, good tip. Thanks, Alan. I shall try and make it along for that. And by the way, all of our speakers' bios and LinkedIn profiles are in the chat. So if you want to connect with any of them on LinkedIn, please do so. But listen, let's just dive straight in, because on the digital front topic, our Teiss Goblin, who beavers away in the background, keeping us all on the straight and narrow, spotted a news article which we're going to be talking about, which is about a new. Well, it's new on me. It's been going around for a while within the EU, but it's an idea of setting up a digital wallet that would be a digital identity wallet across the EU. This has appeared in raconteur.net. And the story goes a bit like this. The EU is moving closer to rolling out, it says, a continent-wide digital identity system. It says here, according to the article, written by Mark Walsh, which is saying that 14 of the EU's 27 countries, of course Britain is not one, account for 60% of the population, have some type of national digital system, but they can't be used cross-border. So the idea of this is there'll be some pan-European, pan-EU system where there'll be a mobile app that can be a wallet that can store your digital identity that may sit on top of or go alongside or integrate with the current digital identity infrastructure that those countries have got, but this will be usable across the EU. So there's loads to get into here. There's lots of detail in this, and it's a big spiraling EU-wide massive thing. Laurie, can I come to you first of all on this? Were you aware of this already, and what did you make of it when you read the Raconteur article?
Well, I've heard of it in other places like China, and it kind of fills me with dread because of like the Big Brother kind of theory behind it. Although I'm a big fan of convenience, and I'm going through this really horrible thing at the moment where I'm trying to get certified in something, and I've provided 3 different physical copies of identification, and I now have to go and see a certain professional in face-to-face to go and get certified. So anything that's going to make life like that easier, I'm all for. However, it is a bit scary. Like, is the government trying to take over? There's lots of conspiracy theories around it. We had a lot of it during COVID, right? Like, is the government trying to take control of us? Ultimately, I think it's a good idea, but I do think it needs to be like done in a simple way that's easy for us as consumers to adopt. Yeah,
I think that's a good point. Ease of adoption will be something as part of this. And by the way, in the article, it does say that, as far as I can work out, it doesn't mean that it's going to be an EU piece of technology that's going to be rolled out and all countries are going to sort of adopt. As far as I'm aware, each country can build their own system, but the EU will sort of set a standard, because obviously it's got to work in different EU countries. So you will still be able to have some wiggle room about this. But Kevin, how do you feel about this? I mean, Laurie's already raised the point about privacy and security and that kind of thing. What do you reckon to this?
I think it's long overdue, to be honest. I get there's obviously going to be some challenges, but we've had paper physical passports, which is, I guess, the equivalent forever. And obviously each country has their own one, but they've got to be interoperable in some way. You know, your passport is trusted as ID in most countries in the world, right? So there's got to be some overarching thing above that kind of says, these are what a passport has in it. This is how it works. This is that kind of thing, right? So that's kind of already there, just in paper, which is kind of a bit of a pain if you want to use your ID online. So I think it's, you know, there is obviously countries like China and other ones that are slightly more draconian, where it probably isn't a great idea because it's furthering the control of people. In terms of being online, I think one of the main things you need to do from it is understand not just adoption, but how you control your data. Obviously, both from the kind of security aspects of can someone get to it, but also if I want access to prove I'm who I say I am, to say register an account with an online store, I might want to provide them with just my name and address, but not any other details, right? If I want to prove I am who I am to get a loan, I might provide name, address, date of birth, last 3 years of addresses, whatever else, right? So depending on what you're trying to achieve, it needs to have a very granular way of saying, I'm only going to give you this. So it's not just kind of what data it has, but also how do I share it and how do I share just parts of it so I can use it online for a variety of different reasons, rather than just being the kind of blanket, here's my passport with all my information on it, and you get all of it or none of it that you do with the kind of paper one.
It does say here, I'm quoting from the article, the European digital wallet would host the information in a user's national digital ID rather than replace it. So if we had in the UK, for example, the digital ID system, we were thinking of a digital ID card, I think, in the UK at one point. This would sort of go into that European digital wallet. It says it's meant to give people full control of their data, allowing them to share specific information such as age without having to reveal other personal details. It says on top of this, it could store various forms of identification, including a driver's license, passport, as you've pointed out, Kevin, and professional credentials, which again, for you, Laurie, could be quite interesting. Rolf, can I come to you on this? I mean, Switzerland, obviously, again, not in the EU, although it's in the EEA, from what I remember. Is there a national ID system in Switzerland? How does it work there? What's the setup?
Well, we do. We have traditional ID, but chip and pin based. We can transition or transfer to some degree the ID into the digital space. But what we do not have as such is a full digital ID. We only have the signature bit. So a bit like the UK, we're going that way. You can sort of use private offerings, but not a sort of supranational EU thing to interact with others. But generally, yeah. But most people seem to be using it in some way, shape, or form.
So, Rolf, I'm confused. This is a digital ID system, or is a physical ID card?
Well, right now, it's still physical, but you then have derivatives of that, don't you? Where you have, for instance, things like retail shopping, the railways, other things. So you can basically choose whether you wish to hold your things as a physical ID, or whether you want to use that as a digital ID. Now, for national ID cards, they're still physical. They will remain so for the foreseeable future. So. I don't know, or I'm not so sure what the Swiss government position might be on having a EU sort of and associated states full digital ID solution.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Yeah, one for places like Switzerland and Norway, etc. Because obviously, there's freedom of movement across those borders, so passport control, all that kind of thing, has to be integrated. So it'd be interesting to see how far those countries sort of pursue this. I suspect the UK, given our government's current approach to the EU, may not be massively keen to hop on board with this one. Laurie, can I come back to you on this? I was quite interested in. I think you mentioned the COVID vaccine and so on. What was interesting about that was I think that's actually laid some of the groundwork for this, from the sounds of it, because they made that COVID passport work across different countries, and I think there's a sense that off the back of that they can build on top of this. Do you think that's sort of the inevitable progress, or do you think that we could just leave it at the COVID passport and they could have stuck there?
I think there's definitely been progress, but there's still kind of the education around it required. So, for example, I was fortunate enough to travel earlier this year and I had a COVID pass, but I still printed off the copies because I had no idea if I'd be able to use it. So I think there's a big kind of education piece around it too, and there's still a lot of kind of open questions around what really is it, what's going to happen, how are we going to be protected, how would it work across borders. If we think about just the different ways we get our identities cross government now, it hardly works in the UK, so how is it going to work across different countries?
It's interesting as well. I mean, Kevin, because I'll come to you on this, because the COVID passport stuff, there was one interesting thing, particularly in the UK, about this, of whether we let private industry do it or whether we let government do it. And obviously, there was the government's ill-fated attempt to do COVID. This was track and trace, and the government's sort of ill-fated attempt to try and do track and trace, which in the end, the private company's solution seemed to be a better bet and a more secrecy enhancing or secrecy preserving bet. But this is the EU trying to do it from sort of government level. How do you feel about that, Kevin, in terms of private companies doing it versus governments doing it, and that divide?
It's a hard one, right? I mean, obviously we've seen the bad. And I can't remember what it was. Was it 43 or 47 billion or something got spent on the track and trace? That was a complete waste. So there's some pretty horrific stories there. So I certainly think some kind of competition to look at, in the same way as you look at, they bake off the next crypto or whatever and look at multiple different people's proposals for what the best version of crypto is, and then they test them all, and the one that comes out best. So some kind of transparent testing would probably be good. You'd certainly want to see an awful lot of whoever does it of testing of this, and you want it to be extremely transparent, because it if this becomes a single or a bunch of federated databases that literally have the keys to all of your identity in, that's going to become probably the biggest target in every country, right? So it's got your possibly passport, driver's license, medical records, whatever, right? There's a huge amount of stuff might end up in this. So I think regardless of who does it, transparency will be key, and some kind of very extensive third party, and not interested that it's a third party like private companies and people doing testing of it prior to even any sniff of it going live, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for those of you who haven't heard of the Indian Aadhaar system, the national identity card system in India, it's really worth having a look at a few of the stories around that. I wonder if somebody's done a pull together, because there were just multiple different attempts to compromise that database, to fake the ID, to steal people's data. It's riddled with problems. I mean, India's a vast country with, in some places, very limited infrastructure, so not ideal comparison. But I mean, I just think that just threw up a huge a number of the concerns around this. And actually, again, to quote from this article, it says the Commission's proposal, this is the European Commission's proposal for the digital wallet, promises high-level security, don't they all, with member states required to meet strict privacy and data protection requirements in compliance with recently passed EU legislation, which it says includes the Cybersecurity Act and the GDPR, of course. It also goes on to say, this is an interesting bit, to streamline the building of the wallet app, the project calls for EU countries and private sector stakeholders, companies, to develop a toolbox setting technical specifications and common standards for the project. So that's the idea. The EU sort of sets the underpinnings for it, and then countries and companies can kind of come up with their own systems.
So sorry, do you want to jump in? One thought that popped up then is if each country is doing it separately, but it's integrated. So presumably, if I'm in the UK and I'm using a digital ID, so someone else in Europe is using their digital ID to prove who they are to another country, there must be some kind of federated access that says country A can access country B systems in some way. Yeah. Otherwise, how do I prove that's legit ID, right? So a country that does it less well than another country, how are they going to protect all of the countries from my country being breached and then being used to make what look like legitimate federated or whatever you want to call it requests to other countries? So the thought popped in my head that actually you end up potentially being at the risk of the lowest common denominator if they're all independent systems, but they can all request data from each other. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, this is a side topic, but interesting parallel, which is about, the way the EU works and the way different alignments work in the EU. One of the things we saw in Greece, of course, was that, there were certain rules about kind of, how much money you should have and what your interest rates should be. And that, the EU has set these guidelines and said, look, we want all EU countries to be, roughly aligned along these things. And then gradually over time, it became a lot more fluid, and some countries were able to go further and some countries were given a bit of a pass to do things. And Greece, the rules around Greece were sort of relaxed to the point where Greece then ended up with a financial problem, which of course became a problem for the rest of the EU. So you can see that from kind of data side, as you say, Kevin, somebody's data protection regime is fantastic, but other EU countries' systems aren't. It's going to be a bit of a problem. Well, I mean, Kevin makes a good point. I mean, this is going to be a massive sort of honeypot of personal data for hackers to go after. I mean, would you be happy enough that there is a security system in place anywhere that would be robust enough to contain this and manage this?
It's difficult to say. Any security system, whether it's the current one, EU-wide, UK, Greece, or any other country, is subject to attacks and breaches. We know that. So is there ever going to be a security system that's strong enough to protect digital IDs or to protect digital trust as a larger sort of commodity? I think if it's evolutionary, if it's moving, then yes, maybe. If it's not, and if people regard it as a static thing, then, you can't just hand it like a banknote that has various sort of characteristics, little attributes that make it sort of safer in terms of forgery and counterfeiting. But I think for a cybersecurity system, it must be reasonably dynamic, it must be growing, auditable, and it should be audited and pen tested at all times. So it's a yes and a no.
Yeah, interesting. Laurie, can I come to you on this? Because obviously in the UK, we've got this debate at the moment about child safety online and what they should do for kids online. And one of the interesting things about that debate that I find fascinating, doesn't really get discussed as much as I think it should, is you've got to then work out who are children, how you identify children when they go online. And there is this interesting question, but if we start to get digital IDs, at least then we can sort of maybe with our online services prove that we're adults and not children and get access to those different services. I just wonder whether we can see the UK government going down, maybe not this line, but going down some other line just to solve that, child protection online bit. I don't know whether you've thought about that and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because how would you kind of create the IDs? Like, what age do you start them at? How do you verify someone? Is it through biometrics? Like, and I always think about this, like, what happens when I die? Like, how am I going to, continue my, does my identity just stop? Who does that? From the child safety point of view, I think it's a quite a big topic. Like, there's obviously been a lot of stuff around TikTok collecting children's data through biometrics, that kind of thing. So I think it's something we really need to it needs to be on the agenda.
Yeah.
From the education perspective, but also when we're thinking about defence in depth and the secure by design approach to the system.
Yeah, interesting. Abbas asks in the chat, why don't all the EU states create a unified staked blockchain? And use that for issuing unique digital IDs? Would it not fix the issues that were identified in the initial incarnation of the EU digital ID wallet. Good thought, Abbas. Sounds like you need to be on their panel of experts. Look, really fascinating, all that stuff. It's endlessly fascinating thing. It's going to be interesting to see this EU scheme roll out. They are reckoning, by the way, it says in here, there's a couple of points I didn't bring up in the article that are probably worth talking about. It says here, there are private privacy groups, EDRI included, that are warning about this inevitably. That's their kind of lookout. They've said it may be unconstitutional in Germany, this particular scheme, and run counter to administrative practices in the Netherlands and Austria. So it already may run into trouble. Also, this is expected to be going live. It said in here 2024. Yeah, live in 2024. So that's like a year and a bit from now. So that's going to be interesting to see how that rolls out. Let's keep an eye on that one and maybe come back and do another teissTalk when it actually rolls out. But look, let's go seamlessly. And by the way, we are still working on bringing Mark back. There's some problems with his webcam. I don't really, you might be able to hear us. I don't know. He's rebooting his machine. We are efforting to bring Mark on. Don't worry about that. But let's go into the topic in hand, the digital trust aspect of this. And I wondered, I mean, we firstly, I think, need to sort of set out our stall in terms of this, because it's quite a wide digital trust framework. I was looking at this from a kind of, if you're a company, who are the people who are supplying you, that kind of supply chain side. But Laurie, I mean, when you know, where would you like to, how would you extend digital trust? How would you sort of define that? And what kind of aspects would you throw into this that we should discuss?
Yeah, so across there's loads of frameworks out there, right? So like Rob said, the ISAC ones come out, there's the McKinsey, the World Economic Forum one came out last month. And one of the key words that always comes up in them is like confidence in stakeholders have in organizations to protect their data. So to me, it sounds more like all stakeholders. So the end users using the organization's services, having trust in how that organization manages their data, how they're using their data responsibly, ethically. We want greater transparency as consumers, right, of what's happening. Yeah. So suppliers, absolutely, but I think it's everyone.
Yeah, interesting. For your folks, I mean, at KPMG, you've obviously got people coming to you for your consultancy services. When digital trust comes up for you, Laurie, in your work, what's generally the angle that people are wanting to? Is it about members of staff? Is it about users and customers? Is it trust of the people that we do deals with, our suppliers and so on? How does it sort of come up in your kind of day-to-day work?
It's all stakeholders, it's all touch points, and the way that we describe digital trust is how you weave security and privacy as a golden thread throughout the business, right? Because there's multiple touch points, and we're living in this digital world where data points are increasing, it's getting more complex. And when we think about brands that we buy from, right, we used to buy a product, that's it. Now we've become invested in brands and invest in what they're doing. So, like, for example, I buy clothes. I no longer buy clothes from Boohoo and Pretty Little Things because of the documentaries on Netflix around them and how they're not ethically sourcing and the worker rights they have and not looking after their workers. So, although I really value convenience and online shopping, and I'm very bad at that, I really have started to take more of an interest in organizations' responsibility and ESG. Yeah.
Interesting, yeah, because there's that's about trust in the brand, I suppose. It's interesting. So I was just reading in the chat, Peter has chimed in and said, aside from what we all do at work, we all consumers have relationships with small businesses. Says he recently received a letter from a doctor's office informing him that they had been breached. His personal information might have been exfiltrated. These smaller enterprises, because GP surgeries in the UK certainly are, small businesses. These smaller enterprises have far less maturity and capability in protecting information than bigger, larger, more developed companies. How do you see society addressing these more vulnerable targets with respect to protecting our personal information? Good question, Peter. We should try and get to that. But for the moment, I want to welcome Mark, who's joined us finally. Mark, where are you joining us from, and how are you doing?
Well, I'm joining us now from my mobile phone in Monterrey, Mexico. When we got started, apparently my computer decided it was no longer going to work for me, so I don't have a lot of trust in my computer right now. But I'm talking to you from Monterrey. Thanks for letting me join late, guys.
Fantastic, thanks for that. And it says here, I don't know whether I've just misread or your job title is sort of been confused here, but it says founder and president of eScout or eScout Consulting. Is eScout Consulting a business name, or is that a job title?
Yeah, it's a business name, right? So I'm an independent consultant in the GRC space, and have along with Rolf have worked with ISACA on a lot of different projects. Most recently on the digital trust framework. So that's where that link is between me and the ISACA side.
I see. Okay. And Mark, we're talking about how we sort of define digital trust and the different parameters of it. In your mind, have you got sort of areas of this that we should focus on and talk about? Which relationships, the trust relationships, we should be fronting up and prioritizing?
Sure. You bet. I think what I'm seeing right now in the market, that a lot of people just focus on financial transactions around digital trust and things like that. And a couple examples here. One in particular that I'm dealing with right now. I outsourced my email to a third-party exchange provider. Well, they got ransomed last Friday, and my email still does not work. And here we are, almost a week later. So the interesting thing is, as I read through a lot of the tweets and a lot of things going on, there are some people say, "Hey, I'm sticking with them," and other people say, "I'm leaving." Right? What are those factors? Right? Because a hotel chain has multiple data breaches. Why is it that I choose to stay with that hotel chain and other people decide not to? So those factors. So interactions that I think are first of all, you've got digital interactions, right? So you and I may be exchanging information. It could be private information, sensitive information. It could be open information. But then it goes into a different realm now when we're talking about financial transactions and those types of things. And these could be anything from a business to consumer, government to constituent, or it could be peer-to-peer. So you and I send a message to each other through WhatsApp. There's a trust between you and I, but do I trust that what we call proxy technology that sits between us? So there's a lot of different pieces on that. And I think that that's one of the things that we really are trying to look at a lot is what are all those aspects, because it may not all be just financially a transaction.
Yeah, interesting. Kevin, can I come to you on this? Firstly, for those who don't know, what does FNZ Group do? And secondly, in your day-to-day job, how does digital trust manifest itself?
So it's a wealth management company. So kind of one of those white label companies that does wealth management for a lot of other firms on their behalf. So you may or may not have heard of us, but quite substantial. So yes, I think there's a huge amount of aspects to it, right? So there's do your consumers trust you? Do you trust your consumers are who they are, say they are? We obviously have advisors and other people logging into our platform. So do we trust who they say they are? Do they trust who we say they are? And again, the kind of whole supply chain piece, like Laurie was touching on, is how do you weave that through your whole business? And I think whilst everyone's digital, I think touching on the kind of supply chain stuff, that's still very manual. So most people's kind of supply chain security is like you might have a bit site output or something as your only digital asset, and then it's a questionnaire or something, right? For most companies, you don't go on site and check stuff. So how could we have some kind of digital kind of capability of the current security posture of all of your suppliers in a way that's trusted and easy to share, that gets away from both the manual task of doing paperwork, but is also much more kind of live and real. So how could you weave in outputs from internal scans and other stuff to create an actual trusted digital score that then says, hey, we trust all of our third parties? Then you could even go to fourth parties much more easily because it's all digital, right? So I think there's some really interesting stuff there in terms of supply chain trust and security. And I always think it's really interesting that you need to make sure it's kind of bi-directional. I think kind of a really good offline example is when someone phones you up and says they're your bank or whatever and starts asking for your ID, which does happen. Your bank may phone you and try to identify you, right? And you're like, well, who are you? You haven't proved to me you're who you say you are, so I'm not going to phone you back. So how do you also make a lot of this stuff bi-directional? So when Jim tries and log into your system and says he's Jim, he's also convinced that you're the right system, so you can't you're not a phishing site or something else. So I think there's some really interesting things to do here, but it's just how we make it all work.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I mean, sticking with you just for a moment then, going back to the story we discussed before, this idea of an EU digital identity system, digital identity wallet, that potentially holds out the possibility that for EU customers of yours, you will be able to sort of say, this person is who they say they are. But again, to go back to your point, Kevin, you'd have to be able to somehow query some central database. So when they present with whatever it is, their ID, their QR code with the app, you can triangulate that with some kind of central repository to check it. So it's interesting. It holds out the offer, but the mechanics of it are quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think it really comes back to that granular piece as well, right? So there has to be some kind of multi-way conversation that says someone trying to log into your systems or access your systems or post or register or whatever they're trying to do, and you want to know X, Y, Z. So you then go back to the individual and say, we need to know these things for you to do that. The individual makes a decision on whether they're okay with you having that much information. That then gets confirmed, and then you go back to the kind of central database to get the information, but only the information that I've confirmed you can have. So yeah, it was definitely kind of a multi-way handshake that would be needed there. And I think definitely, as again, kind of hark back to my other thing, you'd probably want the thing where, I know we're talking about individuals, but if this is a database of identities, you could have corporate identities as well, right? And company identities and other things. So I can confirm you're definitely the right company that I want to be talking to before you get my data.
Yeah, interesting. Wolf, can I come to you? I mean, you're also in the sort of consulting space, and I wondered for you, how is the issue of digital trust sort of manifesting itself in your work as a consultant? Because I think it's financial services mainly that you do, or
it is both financial services and industry. So we have a variety of clients across several European countries, and much of what you said and what's been said before is very much visible in what we do day to day. Because whether it's a large bank or, as Peter was asking in the chat, a small or medium-sized enterprise, the overarching notion of digital trust is very much there. People are afraid, people are scared to share their information because they read too many things in the papers. Do they trust the European Union and Brussels? Maybe they do not, or mostly they don't. So I guess there's a lot of disorientation, and people would like to see the sort of a guiding star, almost saying, well, this is where we should go to make this a safe and sound proposition. So right now, I think there's a lot of digital trust that isn't there, a lack of trust, and we need to address that. So while we work in the direction of sort of technologically solid frameworks, things that may be open source, things that may be transparent, things that people can look at, the more trust we will get as the sort of rule setters, the framework setters. And now, talking with my ISACA hat on, Mark, you can comment on that one as well, I think. But if we do not provide a fully transparent, easily understood framework and an ecosystem that SMEs can live in, then I do not think we will even establish trust ourselves as the rule makers. And that would be my step number one, because politics have done a lot, whether it be Switzerland, whether it be the US or anywhere. But much of that had ulterior motives to it. So it wasn't quite clearly a trust thing. It was also a control thing, a surveillance thing, a tax thing. And if we cannot get rid of that baggage, then we'll have a very hard time convincing people that we are trying to go in the right direction.
Yeah, interesting. Can I come to you on this, Laurie? Because you mentioned a couple of the frameworks, including the ISACA one, the World Economic Forum and so on. What are those frameworks? I mean, obviously, I'm not asking to recite them word for word, but what do those frameworks sort of say, and how do you implement them, and how useful are they? It's not something I've come across before.
So traditionally, we've got compliance-based frameworks like NIST, ISO 27001. They really help us with the maturity side of things, right? But the way that digital trust has evolved and moved away from like the old zero trust buzzword, right, is how do we align it more with the business? So throughout all of the frameworks, all of these digital trust frameworks, you'll see common themes like references to security, privacy, transparency. We're all saying the same thing, but in different ways. There's currently no kind of like global standard one. So you've got to pick the framework that best suits you, that you understand, and that suits your organization. Is what I think. And just to build on what Rolf was saying around it, there's this real fear around trust. I do think there is, but it is kind of subjective, and it does differ for different demographics, like the younger demographics. So I've got friends who, for example, that use Vitality Insurance. And Vitality Insurance tracks your health data from your wearables, and then you get cheaper insurance and you get points that you can like use towards like discounted gym memberships and stuff like that. I personally wouldn't use that because I'm not very healthy. But what I don't mind doing is like exchanging my shopping data, like my supermarket receipts each week in exchange for points that I'd use for vouchers. So it is subjective and it does differ. So I think it's really important that as an organization you figure out what is important to you, like what's going to affect trust the most, what's going to take a threat-led approach.
Yeah. Kevin, can I come to you on the sort of supply chain aspects of this and the suppliers you've got coming into you? Because that's the other side of this. There's sort of customers, staff. There's also supply chain. I just wondered, in terms of that, are these frameworks particularly helpful in terms of judging that and working out the extent to which you can digitally trust the people who are supplying you digitally, as it were?
So currently, supply chain security, I think, is horrifically broken. For most organizations, you don't have the scale to do it. It's very much reliant on maybe some, one of the kind of bit sitey type companies that do a bit of external scanning of things, which can be horrifically inaccurate because they'll scan every IP you own, and it could be a whole bunch of IPs that have no access to anything that you're not worried about, that may give you a bad score. So a company could be brilliant but have a bad score because they're so sprawling and they've got IPs that have access. They're just ones that have a brochureware site on or something. And conversely, you can look really good just because you've got a reasonably good outer surface, but you could have terrible processes behind the scenes and be horribly insecure in terms of data protection and other things. But when you get scanned externally, your web servers are up to date. So I think and outside of that, there's nothing for most companies technical, right? You might ask for some pen test outputs or something, and you give them a questionnaire saying, hey, do you have a information security management system? Do you have policies and processes in place? Have you had any breaches? That kind of stuff. And they give you some paper-based answers, and you may periodically revisit that once a year for key suppliers, maybe once in never for less key suppliers, depending on how well resourced your organization is. So I think it holds some promise, because as I was touching on before, I think anything that becomes more of a live and genuinely data-driven kind of status of your supply chain, it would be extremely helpful. I just don't think there's anything that's doing that currently, and I don't think these seem to be more focused on individuals than they do kind of supply chainy things. So I think that would be another great initiative. How do we do supply chain security, and how do we scale that, and how do we provide something that's automated and means as a supplier, you can do something once and give it to all of your customers rather than having bespoke questionnaires from every customer and that kind of thing. Right? So both as suppliers and people who are consumers of suppliers, because most companies sit in the middle, right? Most companies have stuff going both sides, right? I want to know how secure my suppliers are, and I have people I supply want to know how secure I am. So I think a digital and automated way of doing that would be amazing. I've not seen anything that's addressing that yet in any meaningful way.
Mark, do you agree, or have you got good news for Kevin? Have you seen something that you think will work?
Do agree on that. I think my perspective on suppliers is this, and I want to link this to the frameworks discussion we just had a second ago. There are frameworks out there for everything. Every framework is going to save your company, but they focus on a specific area. And I do like the tone of the conversations. Like, there's multiple frameworks and standards, bodies of knowledge out there that can help us out with that. And I think picking the parts that are most appropriate for an organization to make a three-dimensional model, meaning that there are parts of your organization that could have a change or modification that could drastically affect your digital trust. Let's say Kevin brought up a digital trust score, right? If I have a digital trust score, it's a numerical score, whatever that would be, that could change tomorrow, right? That changed on Friday when my hosted exchange provider provided zero information, right? Those things. So I think that makes sense. But I think in the traditional sense of digital supply chain, the challenges that we look at is how far back in the lineage can we control our suppliers? Because there are maybe in some cases dozens of suppliers that are providing goods and services all the way till it gets to my third party. So of course, the farther away you get from your initial suppliers, the less control, the less visibility you have. So, in the traditional sense, obviously from a control perspective, what do we put in the contract with that supplier in terms of privacy, cybersecurity matters, continuity types of things, and can we require them to require those of their suppliers? But of course, it does lose its visibility some way back. So I think that some things with to prepare and kind of think about some of those things could happen with suppliers from a digital perspective is have them involved in your continuity testing and in your continuity testing and planning and in your recovery types of services. I think that's been key, and we've seen that in a lot of organizations that are successfully coming out of major incidents because their third parties were involved in that.
Interesting. Just a way, we've only got a few minutes left, but Rolf, I want to come to you on this because think about also the other aspect of this we haven't covered, which is, of course, your staff, your workers, and the digital trust you have with them, which obviously brings us things like insider threat and so on. I just wanted, can all of these different aspects, the insiders, the workers, the customers, the suppliers, can that all be joined up in a sort of digital trust framework? Does it cover all of them, or do you need different ones for each bit?
Well, I think maybe the word framework's a little too narrow here, because like Kevin was saying, the supply chain, you just picture it, you have various firms, say 5 or 6 firms in a chain. They all approach security and cybersecurity through their own information security policy. Now, each of these documents is going to be slightly or vastly different from the other. So now your job is harmonizing even the information security policy, what is written. And you will find that there are many gaps, there are many discrepancies in there. Then you have to go through lengthy contractual negotiations, service levels, other things to make these things sort of even vaguely aligned. So what I kept saying is that we have to move from a framework to an ecosystem where people can actively participate, where people can see what others are doing, where the alignment is more or less evolutionary and automatic. So you do away with various information security policies as they're written by and approved by legal departments, CISOs, and others. So in an ecosystem that deserves its name, you'd obviously have a more dynamic approach, saying, well, what's happened this week? There's been an attack, there's been a new vulnerability or a weakness. Now, the resolution of that issue has to propagate through the ecosystem, so it almost algorithmically, automatically reaches all participants. They may be GP practices, little retail offices, they may be like, cottage industry shops, but as long as they form part of that fabric and you have this dynamic in there that goes away from static negotiations, we make a new version, we do an annual review, and then we get back to it. And in the meantime, lots of things might happen. So I think that goes also for the employees, because Jeff, you mentioned that, insiders and others. If you give them a training at induction, you make them sign a piece of paper saying, yes, I will abide by the security rules. Does that really help? No, it does not, because they quickly forget. Once they've been in the firm for 20 years, so many things have changed that their initial promise is worthless. And then even if they want to do the right thing, or even if they want to do good things and they're not malicious, then it's hard to imagine that all these static artifacts that we associate with digital trust in people, that these will be valid even after a period of 6 months or 12 months. Stuff we did 20 years ago is even, it doesn't even remotely resemble what we're doing now. And when I started in 94 with Securicore, being head of IT and stuff, it was such a different world you couldn't imagine. So anything we did back then, if you hold a piece of paper in my face nowadays saying, but you signed that with Securicore back in 94, didn't you? I'd say, well, I did, but that's so long ago, it's like, so you know what I mean? We have to be evolutionary. We have to be in an ecosystem that really encompasses even the weakest link in the chain. So,
Interesting stuff. Thanks for that, Wolf. Just aware that the time is ticking out for us. And by the way, we are going to be live in London next February. There's a little link there, 23rd of Feb. We've got the European Information Security Summit. I will be there. My co-host Jenny Radcliffe, I think, will be there. So do please click on that, get your tickets. That'd be great. Karen says we need to make sure that the chosen options are affordable. Some companies may cut corners if cost is prohibitive. Good point for that. Thank you, Karen. And also thank you, our panelists, for being part of this. It's been a really interesting discussion. I want to thank Kevin Fielder, who's CISO at FNZ Group, Wolf von Rossing, partner at and CEO at Forford Consulting, Laura Gibbett, Cyber Risk Quantification Manager for KPMG, and Mark Thomas of ISACA. Thanks to all of them. Thanks to you guys for watching. Do please join us for another teissTalk. As I say, Tuesdays and Thursdays are live next week. 4 p.m. on Tuesday, we've got Tom Langford, who's going to be doing developing an intergenerational security awareness program, which is really interesting. I was having a chat with a friend of mine about millennials the other day and how you reach millennials, etc., because I'm that old now. I am going to give the teissTalk mug, the coveted teissTalk mug, to Peter Tessin for his comment about his unfortunate event at the doctor's. I hope that works out okay for you, Peter. Our Thais Goblin will get in touch with you and dispatch the coveted teissTalk mug. But meanwhile, have a fantastic rest of your Thursday. Have a good Friday and a great weekend. Thanks again to Rolf, to Mark, to Laurie, and Kevin.